It's time to talk about a living legend from the golden era of Muay Thai. The sky-piercing knee, Dieselnoi. Much like Thomas the Hitman Hearns, Dieselnoi towered over everyone else in his division. At 6'2", he weighed only 135 pounds. And yet, his expertise was close-range fighting. The quintessential Muay Thai fighter, Dieselnoi was an expert at landing knees from the clinch. Whenever he stepped inside the ring, spectators were treated to the king of knees showcasing technical brilliance along with unrelenting ferocity. This perfect blend of intelligence and aggression led to Dieselnoi racking up 110 wins. He dominated elite fighters, including the legend Samart, who many consider the greatest Muay Thai fighter of all time, and Sagat, who you may know is the influence for the character in the Street Fighter games. Knocking out accomplished fighters as a teenager, Dieselnoi retired just before the age of 24, not because of an injury or any defeat, but because there was simply no one left who was willing to fight him for his title. While it would be easy to dismiss his accomplishments by attributing his wins to the insane height he possessed for his weight class, having a long frame at a capped weight can actually come with a number of weaknesses. But Dieselnoi knew exactly how to negate these potential pitfalls while building on his natural gifts. The distinct techniques and tactics he employed make him the ideal prototype for many Muay Thai fighters to base their style off of, whether taller or much smaller than their opponents. Today, we are incredibly lucky to get to see the man himself demonstrate many of his brilliant techniques up close. Then, we'll watch how it played out in the ring all those years ago. So, let's get to it. Since Dieselnoi obviously had to close the gap before he could throw knees, it only makes sense that he spends a lot of time explaining to students how to control distance and cut off the ring. From long range, Dieselnoi used a very simple but very effective tactic. He employed linear strikes like teeps or knees to herd and corral opponents to the ropes, and then looping shots like round kicks to move them towards corners and cut off lines of escape. And since a common way to stay mid-ring is to constantly move offline, Dieselnoi would move laterally with the opponent to follow them as he closed the distance. Dieselnoi's entire philosophy was to keep moving forward at all costs, never taking a single step back if he could help it. But he was far from reckless. Here he explains that the vast majority of attacks should be thrown off of the lead side. Dieselnoi knew that his rear side was more powerful, but it was also slower and opened him up to being countered. Only once the opponent got stuck in position or turned out of alignment, losing their posture and balance, would Dieselnoi then unleash his rear side attacks. Of course, opponents didn't always want to cooperate. Here Dieselnoi explains that if his opponent tried to be the aggressor and move forward, he would teep them in the chest as they charged in. This way, the teep would be too high to be swept aside with the parry. And here he explains what to do against punchers, demonstrating how their own aggression could lead them to overextend. The perfect setup for a counter knee. So that was long range. But opponents who let Dieselnoi get to mid-range became subject to one of the most devastating and brilliant tactics ever seen in the ring. As Dieselnoi closed distance, his competitors of course tried to stop his momentum with kicks. But rather than block an opponent's incoming kick with his shin, like a typical check, Dieselnoi would instead bring his check inside and underneath his opponent's leg, slamming the top of his knee into their thigh or hamstring. This allowed Dieselnoi to both inflict damage and move the opponent backwards, as he was essentially walking directly into them. To drive them off balance even more, Dieselnoi would lift up on his toes as he checked, turning his knee into a lever to tip his opponent back.
So he's like, look at this. You can see he's getting kicked in the body. So he's like, yeah, my ribs hurt because he kicked me a bunch, but I beat his kicks. And he won.
Again integrating a deep level of knowledge and intelligence into his philosophy of all-out destruction, Dieselnoi almost always preferred to let his opponent throw first. This way, he could counter and cover the distance without worrying about being countered or moved off balance himself. Here Dieselnoi explains something that helped with all of these tactics, showing how he would employ a long guard to get a feel for his opponent's movement. Like a combination of a spear and an antenna, Dieselnoi used both arms as both a weapon and a tool to better judge distance. Taking it one step further, here he explains how he would pair these long guard tactics with a cross guard. Sometimes called a Dracula guard for obvious reasons, one arm was extended and the other wrapped around his chin. Essentially, the cross block caught any strikes that made it through his long leverage block. It could even stop vertical elbows and uppercuts. And although the cross block gave up some offensive options by making it impossible to throw certain strikes off of that arm, Dieselnoi could turn it into a cross frame to control his opponent's head and set up knees. Once Dieselnoi had corralled opponents towards the ropes, he would begin the next phase of entering into clinching range. Since the opponent had limited offensive options against the ropes, Dieselnoi could unleash heavier attacks. He would first throw out a decoy to get them to block, then once they were stuck in place, he would throw his real follow-up attack. In this clip, Dieselnoi explains what to do if an opponent tries to push back to create space. In this instance, he would suddenly pull back to release the tension and load up a counter. This pull only lasted a split second before he would snap back like a rubber band. Like a boa constrictor, Dieselnoi got more and more dangerous the more of a grip he got on his opponent. It's finally time to reveal the secrets of Dieselnoi's legendary sky-piercing knee. To start with, he would grab hold with his dominant rear hand to ensure his opponent was secure. Besides that, the setup to the knee was fairly standard, with Dieselnoi stepping back with the kneeing leg to create space and build power. But then, rather than loading up by first raising his knee or swinging it to the side, he would instead swing upwards from his regular starting position, drawing as straight a line as possible with his weapon to his target. It's this trajectory that allowed him to constantly check underneath his opponent's kicks, but it added a whole other dimension when it came to his knees. Not only did they get there faster, but it was also harder to see and harder to block.
It's up in the air, it's lifted. You can't get past his knee because it's blocking in the air. He's like, that's not going to land, so the referee's going to come break you. So what you have to do is like roll your knee in with that swing from the hip that he's talking about.
Unlike his checks, Dieselnoi would turn his hips over to twist his knee at the last moment, just as the knee connected. This added a lot of extra power at the last moment, meaning that his knee got there as fast as possible, but he also had the weight of his entire body behind it. Because of this, his strike would end up connecting with the top part of his shin, rather than the top of the knee. This isn't standard, but judging by the results, it might be even more effective. As an added bonus, the curve from the twist would naturally follow any opponent who tried to move offline. But for some strange reason, Dieselnoi's opponents always seemed to try their very hardest to stop him from kneeing them. Luckily, Dieselnoi had a multitude of effective ways to set up his strikes from the clinch. To begin with, Dieselnoi maintained a very wide stance in the clinch. As a taller fighter, having his feet close together would make him more susceptible to being tossed or moved. But with a wide base and bowed knees, Dieselnoi could more easily move opponents while remaining stable himself. Just like how he cut off the ring at long range, Dieselnoi preferred to work off his opponent's movement by following their feet with his feet. According to him, being in the clinch is just like dancing. He would flow with his opponents, then cut sharp angles at the perfect moment to move them into a bad position. Of course, points of control are just as important as footwork when it comes to grappling. Here Dieselnoi explains how important it is to squeeze the elbows together when using a double collar tie, also known as a plum. In his case, his long forearms let him clamp his elbows together to where they were almost touching underneath his opponent's neck, dragging them into position for his signature knees. And every time I see this, I can't help but think of an alligator locking onto its prey before it drags it down into the water. But even when trapped in a tight lock, a good Muay Thai fighter still has a number of options. In a style of counters and counter-counters, Dieselnoi always seemed to have the perfect solution to any problems his opponents presented him with. If his competitor tried to escape by turning away, he would drive his knee into their open side. If they attempted to drop their head and duck out of the collar tie, Dieselnoi would just let them duck straight into his incoming knee.
And he's like, if someone grabs and you try to duck out, just knee them in the face. Like, it's not a problem.
And here, he shows off his strategy for when the opponent attempted to punch their way free. Dieselnoi would release one of his collar ties and instead use that arm for an overhook, straightening out his opponent's arm and trapping it to stop them from punching. Going one step further, here he explains how he would actually knee the back of his opponent's arm or shoulder to weaken the muscle, making it harder for them over time to punch with any power. Framing to break posture and create space is another common tactic used defensively against Muay Thai fighters. Dieselnoi's response was to use one arm to create a point of contact, controlling the head, arm, or wrist, and the other arm to bat their frame away, much like parrying a punch. Once the tension was released, his opponents were often left off balance, making it all too easy to move into a dominant position, and then you get the picture. It's hard to imagine how frustrating it must have been for Dieselnoi to retire so young, in his prime, for reasons outside of his control. Like a shooting star, we were only given a brief glimpse of his brilliance, and yet, he left a lasting impression on so many. It speaks to his great spirit that rather than fade off into retirement, Dieselnoi continues to teach his unique, effective knee fighting to this day, passing along the torch of the beauty of Muay Thai so that they may burn just as brightly. And speaking of, huge thanks to the great and prolific fighter Sylvie von Douglas Itu for allowing the use of these clips from the Muay Thai library. I've personally been a patron of the library for years now, and having access to this knowledge that comes directly from these great Muay Thai legends has been invaluable to me as a martial artist. And to be clear, I was not paid, nor was I asked to even promote the library. I simply believe that it's a resource that no martial artist should be without, and I've left a link below. From the Modern Martial Artist, this has been David Christian, wishing you happy training.
So he's talking about how when he was training, he would cry every day. He was tired every day. But then when you go to fight, it's okay. Then you can just rip it out He's like, it's in training, you can be tired all the time, you can cry all the time, but then when you go fight, you are a monster.